The Freedom Hub is a registered charity actually. It is set up to run a survivor school to help victims of modern day slavery recover, and we fund it through a number of social enterprises including cafes, wedding events, venue, retail, online, wholesale, our coffee and ethical business consulting to companies. But the mission is to end modern day slavery, or address it at least here in Australia, both past and present, to help victims of the crime recover. And we've got about 80 survivors in our survivor school right now that we work with. In fact, 87, I've just found out, sorry. 87 victims of slavery in our survivor school, and then partner with the aim to end global slavery, because none of us can do this alone. And that partnership includes businesses, large businesses, small businesses, and also being on different networks for both Australia, but I'm also with the Commonwealth Sustainable Development Goal 8.7. So we partner with a lot of organisations to help the fight to end global slavery. It's a very difficult time for every country in the world right now to understand what the numbers are, because we know that the coronavirus, the last 2 years, has pushed more people. I think it's 140 million people now are jobless around the world globally, and so a lot of people have been pushed into poverty, have no jobs, and then we have a lot of people that are migrants around the world right now, and including in our country, they're displaced and they're working in countries that are not their own because they're desperately looking for jobs. And they're the three main economic drivers for modern day slavery. So while the official figures around the world are 40 million and in Australia 15,000, we believe, based on ILO and the United Nations right now, that the world's going to end up, probably after COVID results come in, they're looking at the figures now, but it could easily be 60 to 80 million. And in Australia, we believe it's going to be 55 to 80,000 people. So it's really drastically changed, but there's no real measures. The Federal Police in Australia, in just the last 8 weeks, have had something like 27 cases of forced labour come to them. I can't remember the exact figures, 23 or so forced marriage situations. The stats are quite high, higher than we've ever seen before. So we really do believe that towards the end of this year, as we start to compile figures, it's pretty drastic, and it'll be the same in every country in the world. We're in dire straits really when it comes to people it's pushed human rights back 20 years, they say. Yeah. There's more slavery in the world than ever before now in history. So it's an umbrella term. Modern day slavery is an umbrella term for lots of different types of slavery, but each country sort of has their definitions within that. In Australia, it's trafficking persons, it's servitude, it's pure slavery, it's forced marriage, it's the worst case of child labour, it's deceptive recruiting, organ harvesting. I think that's all of them. Yeah, so a lot of people think human trafficking or modern day slavery, but human trafficking is part of modern day slavery. Debt bondage is the other one. Well, the reason it started is I found that there was no long-term care for victims of slavery in Australia, so it really started with that. I realised that I couldn't really help from a legal perspective because I'm not a lawyer, and it couldn't help as a social worker because I've never done that either. My heart became on track for this cause because when I was in Europe, in Berlin, I learnt all about the girls being sex trafficked out of Eastern Europe into the West, and so I volunteered in what was like a needle exchange soup kitchen type place to help girls who'd been sex trafficked and tricked into Berlin thinking they were going to be hairdressers or waitresses or something. That changed my life, 4 years in that situation. So when I came back to Australia, I thought, well, what can I do with all that experience? How can I help? When I found out it was happening in our country, what could I do? And, with no qualifications in this field other than some experience in Europe, it was pretty hard. But then when I realised that there was no long-term care, we have a support program set up by the government, but it's only 60 to 90 days, and then they're on their own. So the Freedom Hub was set up for that reason, to help them longer. The business side came a year later because I was determined that we could do fundraising through business because my background is business. and not have to fundraise like charity and write grants and do all that. So that's why I started the social enterprise or business for purpose. COVID forced us into being a charity where we had to rely on government funding and applying for grants and philanthropists to get through, because the business really didn't perform very well. But we're on the way back up, and I do hope that we can get back to at least 60% self-funded through the business. Yeah. It's been really rewarding for me to see women that we had helped 8 years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, who have gone back into the workforce. They're being paid, they've saved up, they're living independently, they're no longer in refuges. We've got 7 I think, babies now. So they've married and had children. And for me, more than paper and statistics, to me, for any woman to be brave enough to go into motherhood, let alone somebody who's had extreme chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, and going from just getting on a bus and getting out of a refuge was a big deal, to now living, working, married and having children is a huge success. It's a huge success. I just wish there was a way we could get grants based on that, but it is. And now we're having to they've come back because we're their family. They're in a country where they've got no friends and family over the years. They've built their friendships and families through the Freedom Hub and through the different people that they've met in their courses. And so now we're running parenting, it's Zoom, admittedly, but parenting coffee club, and we are having social events where they're going out with their babies. But we've had to teach them how to breastfeed and how to, raise toddlers, and that's been a stretch for us, but it's been an essential, because they just don't want to mix with people that they don't know still. But to me, that's been very rewarding for me, to see women who have been so shy and traumatized and too scared to do anything, to coming and seeing me with their baby and being confident and strong is just really special. Yeah. I think everyone can just if everyone does one or two things that with what they've already got. So that could be going from, if they're in Australia or in Sydney, having a cup of coffee, or jumping online, Mother's Day's around the corner or something, or Christmas, and buying ethical products. Everyone should be a conscious consumer, because of the world business, 70% or so is coming through private enterprise, through our purchasing. So both businesses can look at their supply chains and operations and what they're doing to impact slavery overseas or in their own country. And people can also be conscious consumers in what they purchase, because clothing, phones, technology, solar panels we've recently discovered, they've all got slavery in them. And if we want to be sustainable, we can all do something to really think about trying to find an alternative product that doesn't have that in the supply chain. And then there's just getting involved with any NGOs that are fighting this cause, that are involved in this. ESG is huge now. And so there's a lot of effort now going on to the S and the G. E took off, the environment, but now social and governance have become a very big part. So every country in the world, and even here in Australia, there's plenty of charities that are working on the social side and the governance side of improving the world. So looking for companies and charities that are doing that and partnering with them. Businesses should also be partnering with them, because the government cannot fund this. It's $150 billion minimum profit. It's a massive trade. It's something that exploits people and funds terrorism and funds weapons. So governments can't do it alone. Private enterprise really needs to not just turn to the government to help them with the problem, but turn to NGOs that are on the ground, that we know the right ways to do things, because we're actually working against this crime, and we know the right organisations and the right way to funnel money, and that will, sometimes, unfortunately, in a lot of countries, the government or the federal or the police are involved in the trafficking. So you've just got to be really sensitive to how you respond. Yeah, I think they're the main ways people can get involved. You can always just simply make a donation.
Yeah.
That helps everybody. Any NGO is always looking for help with that as well. So volunteering, doing the right shopping, purchasing ethical products, attending our cafe or any cafes that are fundraising for the issue of human rights. That would be the main way to do it. Yeah. Really encourage every business, even if they're really small, if we can do it as a small cafe, to really make sure your supply chain is not fueling this problem. I think businesses most governments are targeting the big corporates, and yes, that'll make a difference, but I think if every business got behind this, we'd have a lot more influence around the world. So that would be my final thing. If you're in business, do something.